Hey Meeple people, and on today's vlog, we are discussing Die in the Dungeon by Fundamental Games. Let's get to it!
You are a powerful creature, accustomed to being in control, with others in constant fear of you. Without warning, you were taken away from your lands by a spell, cast by someone known only as the Die Master, a mighty wizard that even you could not stop. Now you find yourself in an unknown dungeon full of weaker monsters and annoying adventurers. The Die Master has said that you'll only be released if you eradicate the many heroes that have infiltrated the dungeon. You must destroy those who are seeking treasure and fame at the Die Master's expense. It's time to hunt the heroes, or die trying.
Welcome Meeple people, and hello Sarah.
Hi there.
So Sarah, what game are we discussing today?
Today we're going to be discussing the 1 or 2 player game Die in the Dungeon by Fundamental Games. They sent us this copy for the channel. Thank you very much. So I say 1 or 2 player games, but actually you can go all the way up to a 4-player game if you just add some additional sets of standard like RPG dice. So they include 3 sets in the game, and if you provide additional sets, then you can actually play this game with all the way up to 4 players. However, we attempted a 2-player game and a solo game. So we can't really speak to what a 4-player game would be like, but or even a 3-player game, but based on our experience as a 2-player game, I don't think I would recommend trying this with a higher player count.
Yeah, it was pretty rough as a 2-player. It was like,
It was really rough. So we'll come back to that, but first let me tell you a little bit about the game and how it plays. So the storyline for Die in the Dungeon is that we are the monsters in a typical dungeon crawl. Instead of being the adventuring party, like a normal, or like the more, I guess, worn out sort of trope, is that instead of being the adventuring party in the dungeon, this time we are actually like the monsters in the dungeon. And so, for example, in this game that we have set up, we would have this monster and he would represent us as we were going through the dungeon. And essentially, instead of being the adventuring party, we are the monster, which is trying to kill off any adventuring parties that would come into the dungeon. So the way that it works, this is a setup for a solo play through like kind of a practice game. So you normally wouldn't use the box lid, but they've got this sort of pre-printed dungeon here in the box lid, and this is what's recommended for like your first time play as a solo play. So the meat of the game comes in the form of the dungeon, right? So in the dungeon here we have all these different tiles that we can move around the dungeon onto, and essentially we're trying to accomplish different tasks or goals based on what like objectives we've decided to play. So this one is the recommended beginner's game for a solo play, and in this version you are just attempting to fully explore the entire dungeon, see every single tile in the dungeon, encounter different things as you go through it, and then get to the end over here. And if you can do that without dying, then you win. There are different setups. There's actually a dungeon guide here, which comes with a bunch of different setups that you can play where you're facing different heroes, different creatures, different scenarios, different setups, and all that kind of stuff. And normally you would select one of those and you would lay these tiles out actually like on the table, and you would explore throughout the dungeon as you would, like that's kind of like the standard game. But this is the recommended setup if you've never played before. And this kind of looks like what it would look like if we were playing like a full-on game. So what happens is you have this cool little monster dude, and he represents you in the dungeon, and we're going to start on this space here. And like I said, the objective for this scenario is that we fully explore the dungeon and we see all of the tiles in this dungeon, and then we end the game on this tile here. And if we can do that before our time or our life runs out, then we win. However, if our time or our life are ever reduced completely, then we lose, and kind of like the dungeon wins or the adventuring parties win. So your stats are tracked at the bottom of your player sheet there. So starting on the left-hand side, the D20, that represents the amount of time you have in the dungeon. And you're going to lose time every turn, at least once, but you may be able to gain some back, or you may even lose some additional time. Next to that, we have 3 stats that relate to our sort of like fighting ability or skill. So that's going to be our strength, our agility, and our magic. And then next to that, we have our health. And finally, at the end, we have our sort of abilities die that we get to use to purchase different abilities throughout the game. So these dice are placed at the beginning of the game, and the D20 and the D4 are set at, the D20 is at its max value and the D4 is set at its lowest value. Those two are set all the time, and you always put them in those 2 spaces. But the other dice, the dice for your strength, agility, magic, and health, you get to choose which dice you want to place in each area. So Nick has set up his board to look like this. So his creature has a health of 6, for example, but he could have used his D12 in place of the D6 die for health. So his health, his initial starting health could have been 12 instead of 6. You get to choose how you want to place the die for your stats. So what's going to happen is we are going to, on your turn, you're going to gain an ability point, which means that you're just going to go up 1 pip on your D4, and you can use those points from your D4 to purchase abilities that you can perform throughout the game. And we have, excuse me, we have sort of 6 different options for that. You have these cards right here, and those cards can be played once per game. So you spend the necessary number of ability points to sort of like purchase a card, and then you get to carry out its action. Or each creature also has 2 additional abilities that can be used sort of throughout the game as either permanent upgrades or upgrades that you can use more than once. And again, you would just use ability points to be able to get that sort of work in. So on your turn, you gain an ability point. That's the very first thing that happens. Then you have an optional period where you can spend time to gain health. So if you're running low on health, you can spend a little bit of your time, which, you know, brings you a little closer to the end of the game. So you want to be a little careful you don't do it too frequently. But if you're really low on health, it might be a good way for you to sort of combat being low on health, because if you run out of health, that's another way that the game will end. After you spend your time to get health, if you want to, you can also spend your ability points to trigger any of those abilities. Then you automatically lose a time. So like I said earlier, every round of the game, you're going to lose at least 1 time. So I would have to move my D20 down to a D19, and then, you know, we're a little bit closer to the end of the game. After I lose my time, we're actually ready to go ahead and sort of start moving through the dungeon. And when I move through the dungeon, I can move from my current location to any adjacent to any unrevealed tile. So for example, let's say that earlier in the game something had happened and this tile had been revealed. Okay. Now I could either move adjacent to my current location. I could move this way, or I could move adjacent to this location. I could move this way, or this way. Now I'm going to be very honest with you. This is an area where I'm not entirely sure that I've interpreted the rules correctly. The rule book for this was rough, horrifying. It was very, very difficult to understand the rule book, and I was so frustrated with it because it just didn't seem to be working. The way that they were explaining how to do things just didn't seem to work. So we went to BGG and we actually found a different rule book, which was similar but better, and not great, but much, much improved. So this is an area where I'm not entirely sure that I'm actually interpreting the rules correctly, or that we even have the correct rules. Because to my mind, it seems like you'd have to follow these paths. The rules are always very particular about how these dungeon tiles are laid out, no matter what scenario you're playing. So for example, we were told to place these particular tiles in this particular order. And to me, it looks like that it actually creates a path, right? Like I can go this way, and then when I get here, I could go this way, or I could go this way. But in the rules, it specifically states that when you're on a tile, you can move to a tile adjacent to any revealed tile. So for example, from where I am right now, I could either move to one of these tiles, or I could go here and move to one of these 3 tiles. Now, to my mind, that doesn't make as much logical sense as if I sort of followed the path that was established and that we worked hard to establish. So I apologize, but this is one area that I don't really know that we're doing correctly. What we did for Nick and I when we sat down, and we've played a couple of games. Nick played a solo version, and then we attempted a 2-player version. We said that you have to follow the path. You can't just like bust through a wall. So even though this tile is adjacent to my current tile, and even though the rules say that you can move to a tile adjacent to the tile that has been revealed already, we said that you couldn't just bust through this wall, you actually had to go down this path here. And I believe logically that makes the most sense. So on your turn, you could move to an unexplored tile adjacent to any previously explored tile. So I'm sitting here, we're gonna move this way. So I'll flip this tile over, and it's going to do a couple of things. I'm going to rotate it this way so that you can read this text here. So it's going to do a couple of things. The first thing is it's going to give me some sort of condition, possibly. They don't all have this, but this one does. It says, if you are hit with this combat, you lose an additional health. So they're talking about a combat that is about to occur, and if I get hit during this combat phase, instead of losing the 1 health that I'd normally lose, I'll actually lose an additional health because of the text of this tile. The next thing that we're going to look at are these icons down here, which are going to tell us what sort of encounters we're having. We're also going to look at this number right here, which is going to tell us sort of the rank of this encounter. So in this case here, we are going to be facing off against a knight, which is going to be a rank 1. And we're also going to be facing off against, I believe this was a rogue. Is that right, Nikki?
Yeah.
Okay, a rogue, which again will have a rank of 1. So these are the characters that we're going to be encountering as we step into this space in the dungeon. And you'll notice some things about them. They have a rank, they've got some nice artwork. All of the artwork in this game is phenomenal. I love the artwork. And then we've got some statistics down here at the bottom. So this sort of tells you how each party member of this adventuring party is going to assist their teammates in combat. So this guy right here, he's really good at strength. So he has a strength of 4. He's kind of good at agility. He has 2 agility, and he's not that great at magic. He only has 1. Similarly, this guy has 2 strength, 4 agility, and 1 magic. Now, what's going to happen after you step into an encounter is that you're going to have to accept some potential hits from the adventuring party. They get to go first, and there's going to be a sort of priority order based on what type of adventurer they are. So for example, in this particular instance, this guy is going to hit us first, and then this guy, and then we'll have a chance to actually hit them back. Now, if we were to encounter multiples of the same type of adventure, for example, let's say that this adventuring party was supposed to be made up of 2 fighters and a rogue, then the multiples of this particular fighter are going to direct us to have sort of like special circumstances that we're fighting under. So for example, this guy right here, he's a fighter. It says, for each fighter in the party beyond the first heroes, the might and agility attacks that this party rolls get a +1. So because there is 2 of these, for each one more than the first, so 1 here, they get to roll extra, right? So, and there's a little bit of flavor that each type of hero brings to the adventuring party. They each sort of affect the party in different ways. And you'll have to just kind of be cognizant as you're building the adventuring party that you'll encounter. You'll just have to kind of be cognizant of how each one sort of influences their party and changes how you'll have to interact with that particular party. Okay, but in this case, we were just going to go with the 2 that were pictured on the tile. So what we'd have to do is we'd have to accept attacks from these characters first, so they would attack us, and the way that they're going to do that is they're going to roll dice based on the entire party's total value of their particular fighting skill. So this guy is going to hit us first, and he is really good at strength attacks. So we're going to add up all of the strength attacks of the whole party, which in this case is going to be 6, and we would take the die that represents that value. So for example, in this case, it's going to be a D6. Now, let's say for whatever reason the maths just worked out that it was actually a 7 instead of a 6. Well, that we cannot meet that statistic on a D6. The best we can do is a D8. So if their total combined strength was a 7, then we would use a D8 to determine what they're hitting us with. It's a little confusing, but I hope you're following me. All right, so this character is going to hit us with his combined strength of the whole party. So he would roll his dice. And if this value right here meets or exceeds the value that they are attacking.
I think you have to exceed.
Oh, excuse me.
Yeah.
If this value exceeds the value of our monster's stat of the same type. So for example, our monster, he is at an 8. Right, so there's no way for a D6 to actually hit a D8, but let's say that ours was a D6 and we only had 3 pips left on our D6. Then this adventuring party would hit us, and we would take some damage for that.
And also, if they hit if they get a critical.
Yes. So another way that the adventuring party can hit us is if they roll a critical hit. So critical hit would be the max value that the die could hold. So for a D6, it's going to be a 6. For a D10, it'd be a 10, so on. So if when this character rolled against us, they rolled a natural D6, then even though that doesn't meet the value of our stat, it's a critical hit and they'll hit us anyway. When members of the party hit us successfully, they're either going to cost us some life or we're going to have to take a hit to the associated stat die. So for example, in this case, if they rolled a critical hit on their strength roll, then on our strength die, we would either take a hit and go down to a 7, or we'd have to lose a life. So, in combat, we resolve each character and how they relate to the rest of their party in a particular order. Then once each character has had a chance to attack us, then we get a chance to attack the party. And when we attack the party, we choose one of our stats that we want to use, and then we roll an associated die. So for example, if I wanted to fight this team's magic, then I would take a D12 from the supply, and this is what I would roll against this team's magic. So I would roll, I get a 2, let's say that I got a 3. All right, so their magic, their combined total magic was only a 2. I rolled a 3, so I succeeded in beating them, and I get to only remove one adventurer from the party at this point. And again, some of these adventurers are governed by special rules that you have to use when fighting with them or when they're hitting you or that kind of thing. So there are some cases where you'd have to defeat a certain type of adventurer before you could touch anybody else in the party or that kind of thing. However, at some point, you're going to make a decision about who you're targeting, and that character is going to be removed from the adventuring party. They've been defeated, and they're removed from the adventuring party. If any adventurers remain in the party, then they get another chance to try to hit you. So they would roll their dice, and then if they hit you, you would take any damage. If they didn't, you wouldn't, and then it would be your turn again. You would roll again, but now, because the size of the party has been reduced, you may roll a different die than you previously rolled. For example, in the previous example, we rolled a let's see, we had 4, 6, we rolled a D6 in the previous example for this party. But now, because this party has been reduced, we would actually roll a D4 for this adventurer, because that is their stat, and there are no other adventurers to kind of help boost their stat. So we would roll a D4 for them. So in this case here, they rolled a critical hit, so they would damage us. And we would, again, take that damage either directly to our agility, which is what they were targeting, or we would have to take a point of health. So we go back and forth until we've defeated all the adventurers in the party that we were attempting to defeat, or until they've defeated us. And that's sort of like one round of the game. After the combat ends, we sort of reset back to the beginning, and we start again by gaining an ability point on our ability die. Then we can rest to transfer some of our time into life. We can use abilities again, then we lose another time. Then we explore in the dungeon, and then we encounter any heroes that we would encounter in the dungeon. And we just, that's one round of the game, and you just do rounds over and over and over again until you complete whatever the end objective is for whichever scenario that you're playing. Back to our example to start with, this was the sort of starter scenario, and in this example, what we wanted to do was reveal every tile in the dungeon, see everything happening in the dungeon, encounter, multiple creatures and characters and that kind of thing, and hopefully make it to the end before we ran out of time or ran out of health. So yeah, you just do that, and that's how a solo version of the game works. Now, like I said at the beginning of the video, you can play this with 2 players, but it works much, much differently. And you can play it, they even said, with 3 and 4 players if you add additional dice. We don't know how that works. And to be honest with you, I don't even feel 100% confident that I really accurately understand how a 2-player game is supposed to work, because it was
rough.
Very, very painful.
That was, yeah.
We tried I tried to read through all of the materials that are included in the game here, right? So there's a rule book, there's this dungeon guide, there's some like player aids and supplemental information and stuff like that. So I tried to read through everything that was included in the game first to see if I could just understand based on what was in the box. And I felt like I gained a decent overall understanding of the game and what it was attempting to accomplish, but there were a lot of areas where I was like, well, I'm not really sure how this is supposed to work, or what's supposed to happen in this instance, or if in this fight, who has priority order, or that kind of stuff. So there were a lot of questions that I had after reading through everything included in the box. So I got kind of frustrated because I felt like, seems like it's a fairly simple dice shocking game. I don't feel like I should be this confounded by the rules. So we went to BGG and we looked to see if there was any like sort of supplemental information on BGG, and we did find a sort of version 2.0 of the rules, which were a lot better laid out. They were a lot clearer. However, there's nothing here to indicate that you should go look for other rules, right? So if you just open this box and you're just trying to play it, if you didn't know to go look on BGG for other rules, there's nothing here to direct you to do that, which I understand would have been impossible for them if they come up with those rules after they put together this box and sent it out, right? However, maybe they should have done some more playtesting and just some general
just blind playtesting, because then people would have to
because then
get
the
into
rules that would be included in the box would have been better, I think.
Yeah.
So after we went to BGG and we looked for some sort of supplemental information, we found that second edition of the rules, and it did help quite a bit to clear up a lot of the questions and frustrations that I was having with the original rule set. And we were able to, at that point, attempt a 2-player game that we felt at least worked, right? Like the first time we couldn't even get it to like work. And after reading through the extra stuff that we found on BGG, we were able to play a 2-player game that we felt like it actually, okay, well now it's functioning. However, we didn't have a ton of fun with that.
That was rough.
It was
very rough.
It was really, really fiddly.
And the game is fiddly. Like there's a bunch of after you defeat so many heroes within an encounter, then you get pips on a dice, and then those dice, once you get 6, go on this track here, then with this track here, then you can modify your die. It's like, okay, so there's this thing doing this thing and that thing. It's like, oh, that's a lot to always, constantly get involved with. And some people that, bust this out of the box and want to play this might be, overwhelmed.
Well, I think another really, really simple example of an area where the game is a little bit more fiddly than I think it should be, is that every round of the game, you lose at least one time, and you track that stat on a d20. So every round of the game, you are reducing your time by at least one. So you have to turn the side of the d20 to like 19, then 18, then 17, then 16. And that's just not as easy as it could be, right? It could be counters, it could be a dial. Turning dice, I've always thought that turning dice as a life counter is almost an obnoxious way to keep track, because it's so much more fiddly than almost any other method that you could use. And it just felt like there were a lot of areas like that in this game where they could have made a design choice to reduce the fiddly nature of the game, but because I think they were very, very married to the theme, they didn't want to do that. I think that this is supposed to be a really, really reminiscent of an RPG sort of dungeon crawler-esque thing, right? So that's why we have the RPG dice. That's why we have some of the language that's used and that kind of stuff. But I really feel like if you're not into RPGs, it just makes the game harder to play. I mean, even if you are into RPGs, it still makes the game harder to play, but then maybe you like RPGs, so you're willing to put up with that. But to me, there were a lot of seemingly intentional design decisions that reduced the ease of play for the sake of a theme which I don't care about, honestly. I like dungeon crawlers. RPGs are not my bag, but I feel like this could have been a lot more fun if it would have been a lot less fiddly. And it's supposed to be this very light, quick, dungeon crawlery sort of RPG feeling where, as a solo player, you can just kind of go through this experience and, try to fight these characters. And I think that some of the fiddly nature of the game undercuts a lot of the fun that could have been here. And I think for a two-player experience especially, there was just a lot of stuff I just didn't want to do. There was a lot of dice rolling that just didn't seem to, it was like, roll the dice. Oh, based on this result, you have to roll again. Oh, based on this result, you have to roll again. 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 And I just got really, really bored and kind of fed up with but why? Why are we doing this? Why are we going to roll 6 times when we could have rolled once? And I felt like the whole experience as a 2-player game was probably forced. I feel like this really shone as a solo experience.
It really did, because after we put away the 2-player, we did the solo, and we were, I was running the character, Sarah was answering my questions, and it was it was more fun.
It was a lot more fun.
Yeah.
It was a lot simpler. It was a lot less fiddly. It took a lot less time. So I really, really think that as a solo game, if you like dungeon crawlers, if you like dice chuckers, if you like D&D or like an RPG sort of feel to games, you will probably enjoy this. Please, 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 just recognize that if you're going to try to play this with more than one player, you are in for a trip.
Yep.
That being said, there are a few things that we really, really did like about the game. I think the artwork is phenomenal. I'm in love with this artwork. They used dice to come up with all of these characters, and they're so much fun, and they're so thematic, and there are just, I love the approach they took to this production. It's so cool. The dice characters are just so thematic and so much fun and so cool and very unique. I haven't seen a lot of characters like this in board game art, and I thought it was a really, really fun approach. There Their materials are really cool. These are
like those
plastic acrylic tokens. Look, these are so cool.
Yeah, that's just we don't see those in board games anymore.
Yeah,
and if it's like custom, or if it's like some kind of like upgrade, but people do miniatures. And I'm like, sometimes I don't want a miniature. Sometimes I want to see the acrylic stuff.
I think these are really cool. And they have these really nice acrylic tokens that you use as you go through the dungeon. You like find these items and you can use them to help you sort of like in your quest. And these are nice acrylic tokens that are really cool. All of there's like a screen printed die that you roll occasionally to sort of like
add more
auto generate like different types of characters that you might encounter. They provided plenty of everything. There's so much stuff contained in this box that we didn't even use for the first game. There are tons of these dungeon tiles. There are a bunch of these tokens. There are several different characters that you can use. There are tons of additional things. There's like a whole deck of cards that is just for if you want to use a deck of cards instead of dice. So there's like a randomizer deck that you can use instead of dice if you'd rather not use dice. There's bonus content. There's all kinds of stuff. And I think it's all pretty well produced.
Yeah, and just with that said, just with everything in here, this just totally shines as a solo game. Like, I really wish, honestly, this should just be for solo. That's just, our opinion.
I personally think that that's 100% correct. I don't think that you should try to play this as a 2, 3, or 4 player game, even though the rules say that you can. I would say that the rules for those games need a lot of tweaking before that's going to be a fun experience, in my opinion. But as a solo game, I think we liked it quite a bit. And it's really nicely presented, right? I love some of these components. The artwork is phenomenal. And I think as a simple, 30-minute dice chucker solo experience, this one has a unique theme. It's got fun stuff happening in the game. So yeah. Play it as a solo game.
Yeah. So this was our discussion of Die in the Dungeon by Fundamental Games. And we hope you all have enjoyed it. Leave it in the comments if you agree, disagree. We're always open to, everyone's opinion on games. We're happy when people send us games that aren't in our wheelhouse or are just different, because we like to expand our experience in board gaming. And even if we disagree on a game, we hope everyone will at least check the game out before they just hear our opinions. And yeah, so again, we hope you all enjoyed this vlog. We will catch y'all next time. Toodles!